to say several things about the people of this institution, but because of the self-effacement that they wish to cherish, I would not say so many things about them, but I would say a huge thank you to all of them for having invited me to be here amongst you this morning. And it is because of them that this program could be possible, and it could be possible for me to meet you here this morning. A huge thank you to all of you. And above all, you could make it possible to be here because the interaction becomes successful only when it becomes two-sided. If it is one-sided, the interaction is not successful at all. Now I came here day before yesterday in the evening, was staying in a hotel, and then the people over here, they were kind enough to take me to the several places. And therefore, before I begin, I would like to go in reverence to the land of Tamil Nadu. Let me tell you, this is a land that is steeped, this is what I felt about the land. It is steeped very deeply into charis, into wisdom, and then cultural brilliance also. When I visited the several temples of this place yesterday, I found that the idols are not simply stones, or the statues are not simply stones, but they are symphonies in silence. This is what I realized when I visited the temple, and therefore there is a need to realize that symphony, right? To realize that symphony in silence. Not only this, dear friends, this is a land, the bridge of which gives the fragrance of the Sangam poetry. Not only that, but even when you go around the street, you will find the, let me say, the rhythm of Bharatanatyam. That also gave me a sort of solace when I was going along with my friend to visit some of the temples. And then during the night hours, I was taking a round of the campus, and I came across certain statues here, alright, the cuts, and the first was Velu Valur, and I think that you must be aware of him. He was a great poet, right, a poet who wrote for eternal wisdom, right, and then not only this, if you remember, there was another great poet that was born on this country, on this land, and that was Subramanyam Bharati. Is there anyone who is working on Subramanyam Bharati? If not working, please take up some task on him. Because it was he who rose this nation from the slumber that it suffered from. Right, so you should take up some researches on him. Not only this, then I could equally remember that great man, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who rose from Kameshwaram and did have the credit to become the first people's president of this country. And I underline people's president, I don't say president because he was not the first president of India, but he was people's president, would take liberty with all the bondages and would say, I don't bother about these protocols, and would meet the people, talk to them, would realize, and then would write about them. I salute such a land. Not only this, when I looked at Chennai itself, I found the city was marvelous in the sense that it is a combination of tradition and innovation. And I could coin a better word for this. I would say that this is a place where traditions dance with innovation. And then in the midst of this city stand your institution, which I do not think is less than a modern curriculum, Gurukula, right, where teaching is not a profession, but teaching is a sacred offering. And the, let me say, the minds of the younger generations or the future generations are formed not only with that sense of profession, with a sense of purpose and passion. So it is with this sense that I salute all of you, this state of Tamil Nadu, this place of Chennai, and this institution. And I am highly obliged that you made me come and speak to you people. Right, so a huge thank you once again. I intend to speak on the topic reimagining research, methodological frontiers in ELT and English literature. In fact, this was the topic that came to me, and these people wanted me to speak on it. So I decided that I would speak in such a way so that I can give you something, and from the lecture you can take something that which may be useful for your purpose of research. Now, therefore, for the purpose of this lecture, what we can do is, because a better lecture is one that is structured, and therefore I would speak, let us say, some 40-50 minutes, and then I would invite observations, questions, and the other things that you liked or disliked, or the queries from your side. Is that okay? I hope you will not get bored when I speak. And when you get bored, just ask me to stop, right? I will immediately stop. Okay, so now I divide my lecture into three components. Number one, I would be talking about what has happened in the field of research in this country, and my area being ELT and English literature, number one. Then I would be talking about what is happening now, and then what we need to do. These are the three major things that I would be talking about, that I would be focusing upon when I talk about reimagining research in the field of ELT and English literature. Dear friends, when we talk about the researches, we have been, let me tell you, very unfortunate country in the sense that Japan came into being. And when I say Japan came into being, means English came into being in Japan very late, later than it came into being, because English being the legacy of this country. But then the courses, the way they designed the courses, did the researches, they could own up English in their own way. This country could not do it even after 80 years, almost 80 years of independence. Now that we need to do. Let me tell you, this is not a story, but when I went to Japan, because the poet the novelist for whom I have come to conduct a viva voce, he was a Japanese born novelist. So when I happened to visit Japan, I chaired a session. I was a part of a seminar. They offered me to chair a session. After having chaired the session, when the session got ended, I talked to my co-chair, and he was a Japanese. I spoke to him, how do you do? And he also said to me, how do you do? Because how do you do is responded by how do you do. That made me so happy. And then he said that here we do is, means, then I asked him, what do you teach? And then he started telling me that in the name of English literature as such, we do not teach any text. Keats, Shelley, Shakespeare all gone from our curriculum. In the name of English, what we teach Japanese classics and translation. And in the name of English, there are only two papers that we keep. Number one, English grammar, and number two, English communication. Dear friends, that could not happen in this country even after 8 decades of independence, political rigor, which must have happened because even the dimensions of teaching English in this country must have undergone a change immediately after this country became free. But that could not happen. Now the people like you need to shoulder that responsibility. Even NEP 2020 has come into being that talks about a complete change, a complete overhauling, and that overhauling needs to begin from the places like you. The second thing that he talked about, I'm talking about that Japanese discourse. He said here every teacher makes it a point to go to the class before 2 minutes. He will come to the institution almost 10 minutes earlier, will go to his room, prepare a cup of coffee, will chair his head, and then when there are 2 minutes in the classroom, he will go stand outside the classroom, will wait for his turn, and if he is late, then he will think that he has destroyed 1 hour of 30 students, and he will repent for that, and he will try to recompensate the student for that purpose. Now when he was narrating that story to me, I held my head in my hands and wept I'm not talking about this institution. I'm talking about the universities, the state universities, the central universities and the student as well, that the sense of sincerity and commitment has also disappeared. And therefore, this institution I appreciate as an institution of conviction, simplicity and scholarship, and for that I salute even the founders and the other people who are carrying on this vision or this flame of education to the generations. And therefore, dear friends, I underline, unfortunately, in the post-independence India, there are two words which have been very prominent in this country. We have been extremely dependent on received knowledge and received experience. I underline received experience and received knowledge. The knowledge that came from them, from the West, we were dependent upon them. The experience that came from them, we tried to cherish it, and therefore we considered whatever they said and blindly decided to follow it. And therefore, long back, it was almost some 22 years ago, that I wrote an article, and the title of the article was Research for Whom? And this article was published in the newspaper Times of India on July 25th, 2012. Right? And in that I talked about what is the condition of the research in this country. How is it that we conduct multitudes of researches every year, and yet the lot of the humanity continues to be the same? The lot of the humanity must undergo a change. That has not undergone a change. Now our researchers must target that change, but that change cannot be brought about unless we remove ourselves from these two things, right? Received experience and received knowledge. Now the problem with this country is we want to retain all the Western values, received knowledge and Western literature. We have not made researches relevant to our situation. We have failed to comprehend the unstated aims of the English described clearly, and there was a great man, Horace Wilson. He wrote an article long back. He was a friend of India, although British, but he was a friend of India, and he wrote an article in the year 1836. And the name of the journal in which he wrote that article, the name of the journal is Asiatic Journal. In that journal he talked about, and he wrote, I am quoting that passage because it's very unique to remember, because when you do have how this country has suffered because of our legacy, the so-called dependence upon them. And I'm reading it out, the quotation, the one of the quotations from the article that he wrote, and the title of the article was Research for the Natives of India. Research for the Natives of India. And in that article he wrote, it was published in the year 1836, long back. By annihilating native literature, by sweeping away all sources of pride and pleasure in their own mental efforts, by rendering a whole people dependent upon a remote and unknown country for all their ideas and for the words in which to clothe them, we should degrade their character, depress their energies, and render them incapable of aspiring to any intellectual distinction. And this is how they did have a systematic plan to destroy the distinction that we have had, and we could not even comprehend that conspiracy. If some of you are sensible enough, and if you know that in the name of the promotion of Sanskrit language, they founded a commission here in this country, and the headquarters of that country was there, where? In London. And what they would do? They would interpret and reinterpret the Sanskrit text the way they would like. And you see, it was during this course of interpretation and reinterpretation that Manu Smriti was completely distorted. And therefore the text that came to us is not the same one that was written by Manu, right? The Manu Smriti, it happened with almost every text, because the sole agenda being divide and rule. And this was practically applied to the field of education, because education is the place where the destiny of a nation is framed. And the English could very well realize it. Not only the English, but even the people who came before English, that is the invaders in this country. And therefore sometimes I make use of a very wonderful analogy for this. Have you heard something about Kohinoor diamond? Right? With whom is it associated? there was an invader who took it, who captured it. Ahmed Shah Abdali, right? Nadir Shah, sorry. Right, he took it and it was kept there in Delhi. Now when the British came, they took it and they kept it there in London Museum. Still it continues to be there. Now Modi government is making efforts to bring it back, but still it is there. So sometimes I make a comparison. I make use of an analogy and I say the university research system in India is a standing monument of the mission accomplished. The British took away not only the Kohinoor diamond from India, but our confidence too. And this is the tragedy that has happened in this country. They did not take away only the coin. They might have taken away the Kohinoor diamond. We would not have bothered about it. But with this, they took away our confidence also. And we tried. Now we need to verify everything from them, and it becomes a fact, verifiable fact only when they verify. Let us talk about Ram Setu. We would not accept that Ram Setu does exist, but when they would certify that it exists, and if you do something wrong to it, now the creatures which are living around will be destroyed, and it will be a great ecological loss. Only then we would accept that this is a fact. So this dependence needs to be done away with. Now independence did not free us therefore from the syndrome of the supremacy of the British. Now this is the misfortune of this country. As a result, we decided to abandon, and this is the problem with the research, abandon our metrics, number one, our methodics, number two, our material and man in favor of the West. The dictates of the West succeeded in executing the colonial conspiracy that every Indian parampara is superstitious, obsolete, and does not come true on the axis of reason. Every parampara is superstitious. Now there is a difference. We could not even make a distinction between tradition and parampara. Now there is a very famous anthropologist, and the name of that anthropologist is S.R. Doshi. He talks about that there is a distinction between the tradition that comes from the West and the parampara that we cherish. Our parampara is the base of modernity. Our parampara is not static. Look at all the paramparas of this country. They have undergone a change in accordance with the time parameters, in accordance with the context, in accordance with the time. We could not make that distinction, and therefore the parampara of this country is continuous. It is dynamic. It is not something static. We could not recognize, and we could not give a space to it the way we tried to analyze the text that came to us for analysis. Now this is something very unfortunate. It culminated into the decline of our researchers. And long back, declining higher education was the another article that I published in the year 2008. And I talked about what is the condition of education in this country at all the three parameters: the teaching, number one, number two, the extension activities, and number three, the research. Now you need to keep all these parameters in your mind. Simply our task, we think, is somehow to get the degree, and after we get the degree, we become free from all these notions, because when we get the degree, we need to think about the nation. Why are we talking about, why are we getting that degree, right? And very beautifully I will talk about that also. Chanakya, while talking about the researches, he makes a distinction between three types of research. He says there is shodh, right, that he calls research. Then he says there is anveshan, that he calls investigation. And then he says there is anusandhan. Anusandhan is investigation, and then anveshan, exploration. He makes a distinction, and he says that these things must continue. And therefore no research is ever completed. We say that I have done my PhD, well and good, but at the same time, what is the best PhD? Is there anyone who can talk about it? Which work do you consider is the best work of research? Maybe PhD, maybe a project. Now a project that can lays down the further scope of research. That this much I have done, but now this is the further area that can be explored. That is the best work. And this is what Chanakya says. The West does not say about it anywhere. Right? So we need to incorporate those things in our curriculum. Now you see, therefore, our conceptualization of research led to confusion. And what this confusion did, this confusion sometimes led to confrontation also, conflict between the East and the West, because ultimately, let me say, who occupied the chairs, who were at the helm of the affairs, they wanted to follow them. But then, that did not suit our parameters, our culture, our climate. And unless you take up a research work that suits your climate, that suits your culture, that suits your parameter, you will not be doing, let me say, justice to the work that you have taken up. And therefore, dear friend, we need to have conceptual clarity at our hand when we talk about all these things. I would begin by giving you very, very simple examples. Let us talk about approach. Let us talk about method. Both ELT people and both literature people, they need approach, they need method, they need technique, they need strategy, they need theory, they need facts and all that. Now, if I have said that we need to conceptualize for the sake of clarity. Now, if we could not conceptualize in this country for the sake of clarity, we borrowed what they said, and therefore we continue to quote this what Lasky said, this is what Austin said, but we never bothered about our own literature. This is what Chanakya said, this is what Bhartari Hari said, or this is what Bharat Muni, that is in Bharatnatyam, he has said. We never bothered about that. Now let me tell you, the time has come that we need to bother about those metrics. If we do not bother, then let me tell you, the time is not far away to make us abolish from the spectrum. We will be diminished, let me tell you. And I am speaking this harsh language because still, despite this NEP has come into being, we continue to beat the same drum. Right? We have not yet changed. We need to take this torch of change a little ahead so that the country and the world may know that we did have a glorious culture. Very recently nowadays, whatever Prime Minister Modi ji does, everywhere when he goes, he takes Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and then the second book that he carries with him is Bharat Vaibhav. I do not know whether you know it or not. And that has been translated into English, but then he decided to retain the title of the English book also as Bharat Vaibhav, and within the bracket, the glory of India, the glory of Bharat has been written. Now, we, therefore, the foreigners, he has got, let me say, mission with which he is working, and that mission should percolate to the institution also. That we need to spread a message to the people that this country was great and this greatness was destroyed. They made an attempt to destroy that greatness, and therefore we need the revival of that greatness. So, dear friend, when we talk about anything about the word approach, any idea, how do you define approach? Approach. And when you make a distinction between the two, approach and method, do you make a distinction? Because the West says that when we talk about the approach is, when we talk about several approaches, several methods and put them together, it becomes an approach. This is what the West says. But there is, let me tell you, there cannot be a more wonderful explanation of this concept than that is there in that is there in let me tell you in Chanakya's Arthashastra. Chanakya's Arthashastra, the book that I talked about, and he talks about not Chanakya, just I'm sorry, Susurt Samhita. Susurt, you must have heard the name. This is a medical text. Susurt was primarily a Vaidya, a surgeon. But then he talks about the approach and very explicitly makes a distinction between method and approach. Talking about the approach, he talks about 4 methods. And what does he say? He says that when we talk about the approach, it has got 5 elements into it. Number 1, direct observation, and in Hindi he calls it Pratyaksh Avalokan. Pratyaksh Avalokan in Sanskrit or Hindi. Then the second component he says is inference, and in Sanskrit he calls it Anuman, Anumana. And then the third one he says is testimony, and that testimony must be very authoritative. And In Sanskrit he calls it aptopadesh. Aptopadesh. And then he talks about ethical conduct. Ethical conduct, Vaidya Lakshan. Because he's talking about, you see, medical science, therefore the Lakshana of a doctor, the Lakshana of a traditional doctor, Vaidya. And then he talks about the practical training, which is based on Shastra. And therefore look at it, even the significance, because our education was never compartmentalized. It was holistic, it was interdisciplinary. And therefore look at the significance of linguistics. Even when the patient was cured, even when you eat, you start your eating by reciting some mantras. Why do you do it? Even when you take some medicine, my grandfather, when he lived, he would tell me, "Beta, you take this medicine, but then recite this mantra in advance." And Susut talks about all this in his Samhita. He says that if you operate upon a patient for this particular purpose, you start operation by reciting this mantra. And then he talks about the significance. You just read Susut Samhita, you will come to know the way he talks about the significance of that mantra in, let me say, in the recovery of the patient. And thereafter, after having talked about these 5 elements, he makes a very valid definition of the word approach. And what he says about approach is something very fantastic. Now listen to it and try to imbibe this definition, carry this definition with you and remember it all the time. That will enable you to make a distinction between method and approach. He says an approach is an assumption. An approach is an assumption, the validity or the veracity of which cannot be challenged. The veracity or validity of which cannot be challenged. That will continue to be true everywhere. That is not the case with method. For example, I have to go to SRM portal from here. Now there are various ways I can decide that I will take this route. I will then, by going that route, I will come to this place. It will be a wrong route, no doubt about it. But then it is very true that I will reach SRM portal. I can also decide, no, it is very close, so I will take this route and reach. But then both of them are true. Right? I can take this side or that side. Now taking side will not be, that is the assumption. I will say that this road will take me to SRM hotel. I can also say this road will take me to SRM hotel, assumption. But the way I will go, maybe that I will go on a cycle, I will go on foot. What it would be? It would be the method that I would make use of. So you look at the distinction between the two. He says method is the way of execution. But when we talk about approach is the assumption, the validity of which cannot be challenged. The veracity of which cannot be challenged. Now what happened to this country is that we forgot under the impact of the British to make a distinction between technique and strategy also. And nowadays a strategy has become more popular than the word technique. Do you know what is the difference between the two? And therefore as a result our researches have become unethical. Strategy means that somehow or the other, either by crooked or let us say or fair or foul means, I have to complete my research work. And now therefore the word research strategism has come into being, which I never approved. My teacher would tell me, "Beta, when you carry out the research, never make use of this word because this is very harmful and carry a very bad impression of our culture. Because our culture has not been of that time." But now that word, there is a basic difference when we talk about technique and when we talk about strategy. For example, I will go on bicycle slowly. Technique. With an implication, implication that I will go slowly or I will go fast, keeping in mind the traffic implications. That is not there in the word strategy. Right? And therefore we try to write some 300 pages, try to submit it to the university and try to get our degree. That is the whole endeavor in which we are busy all these days. Right? And even we have failed to make a distinction among these very basic terms of research. Let us come to theory, what the West says about theory. Now there are similarity also, no doubt about it. I am not talking about distinction only, there are similarity. When you talk about theory, both East and West, that is India and West they say theory is an act of seeing through. SEEING, seeing through. But if you go ahead, then West says theory has ended. The role of theory is captured. But then India or the East believes in the fact that theory continues to exist, without which you cannot trade on your path properly. The basic distinction. They have done away with the role of theory, but then the East says no, theory still continues to play its pivotal role. How many of us, The End of Theory, have you read? Any one of you have read that book? Read that book. Right? Very fundamental book as far as the research is concerned. Then the very concept of text. What about the concept of text? When we talk about the West, West says, very recently, only under the impact of the East, they have started considering, or let me say, inviting a new idea about the text. Otherwise, text would be a printed page for them. But if we talk about in this country, there has been a tradition of, even if there is let me say the youngest one, what he is taught. The mother will say, let us say Ram Ram to everyone. If you go to northern part of country, this is what, or let us say Krishna, or let us say Hanuman Chalisa is being recited almost by everyone in the family, in some or the other way. That has been the tradition of this country. Text means orality was considered to be a part of the text. That never happened in the West. Now under the impact of the East, they have started that we should continue. We should also take up the studies on orality. The folklore and the folk literature. Now they are after the study of the folk literature of India because they want to encash upon it. Right? But then the things are not because we have also started understanding the strategy and the conspiracy that they carry in their hand. And therefore, dear friends, we need to consider these conspiracies, these deliberate explanations and interpretations which came to us because of a particular motive which these people did have in their mind. And therefore, you see, if you look at our text, our researches, they identified all these things well in advance. Intertextuality came into being in English studies only after 1980s. Intersectionality, that also came into being after 1980s in this country, that is in the West. But if you look at our bhashyas, Patanjali's Mahabhashya, commentaries, the critical commentaries, he talked about these things in those days. Patanjali's Mahabhashya, talking about the concept of Patanjali, right? Great commentaries came, and those commentaries talked about intersectionality. That is, there is a relationship between various classes, caste, right, and all the other things which exist. And therefore, one caste and one class, or one group and the other group cannot be separated from each other. And therefore, my interest is to be seen in the interest of this gentleman, and vice versa. Right? That the West could not realize. That we need to, therefore, our concept of, let me say, theorization, conceptualization of research are much more older, much more clear, right, than the concept which are there in the West. West is evolving, but then we are fully evolved. The only thing is that we try to ignore our own knowledge and therefore suffer from the melody, right? And the country which was to lead the torch of knowledge in the world became a backward country, or came to be known as a backward country. Dear friend, when we talk about researches, the West talks about maximization or minimization. Right? It does not talk about familiarization, defamiliarization. And when we talk about defamiliarization, it is the real research. When you defamiliarize, when you reduce, somebody has said something and you put it in another way in a reduced form, or you try to enlarge what has been said from the point of view explanation, that is not simply research. But when you defamiliarize, now there are certain siddhanta in this country, Vakrokti Siddhanta. Is there anybody who have heard about it? Kuntuka's Vakrokti Siddhanta. Now this is what he talks about. He says, unless you defamiliarize, for example, if I say she is a rose, and yet we know she cannot be a rose. what he's talking about. Rose, something physical in the form of a flower. But then when we talk about this flower, then there are some attributes which are the part of this flower. What are they? Let us say the delicacy, let us say the beauty, let us say the condition in which the flower, the rose flower can live, all those things. So when we talk about those attributes, the Vakrokti comes into being. Right? She is a rose. She is very delicate like a rose. She is very beautiful like a rose. She can live in the adverse conditions like a rose lives. Now, unless we learn to defamiliarize the research, a genuine research will never take place. And therefore, dear friends, we need to defamiliarize. We could not even comprehend the concept of interdisciplinarity, which is very famous nowadays. Everybody talks about interdisciplinarity. And we think that this is against discipline. When we talk about one discipline, disciplinarity, and when we talk about interdisciplinarity, we talk about that this is against one discipline. Or we are not talking about the monopoly of one discipline. Up to that, it is alright. But then, the another mistake that they commit is, they talk about assimilation of various disciplines. And that is why there is a writer, he talks about the discipline of the death of a discipline, comparative literature. Why does she say so? Why does he say so? He talks about the death of a discipline. He talks about the death of the discipline because of this nature. Because under the misnomer of interdisciplinarity, what we did, we tried to assimilate all the disciplines, and therefore they lost their identity. Rather than assimilating, what we should have done, we should have integrated all the disciplines together. We could not integrate. There is a difference, dear friends, when we talk about integration and assimilation. Assimilation, when the things are assimilated, they lose their identity. But when the things are integrated, they continue to be independent. They continue to be independent, and therefore, when we talk about integration of the tribal, in my area, in your area also, let us say the downtrodden people, we are not talking about that they must lose their characteristics or their cultural characteristics, but they must be integrated by retaining their characteristics. Right? So that is the need of the, not assimilation, but integration. Dear friends, we could not comprehend that meaning also. Multidisciplinarity became, let me say, a sort of utopia for us. Even today, when a complete change has come over the world, our departments of English continue to be the departments of English. Now, throughout the world, a complete change has taken place. Now, departments of English are not departments of English and foreign languages, with an apology to all the people who are sitting here, but then they are the departments of comparative literature and word literature or cultural studies. Because even the very, let me say, parameters of teaching English in this country after independence must undergo a change. We should not teach English to teach Englishness, but we need to teach English to project Indianness, so that the world may know what we were, what we are, and what we are going to be. If that we do not know, then the things are going to be very difficult for us to make them comprehend that we do exist. Now, therefore, dear friends, we did not follow the lead of our own seers and scientists who rejected compartmentalization of research. As a result, our researches in humanity do not show the changes brought about means our researches in the humanities, they could not keep pace with the researches in science. Science continued to develop, but then the researches in the humanity could not be developed because of this. Now, this is what Chanakya said to Chandragupta Maurya, talking about the very basic of research. What he says, he talks about the purpose of research, and he talks about the fact that research is a continuous process. Right? And what he says, although there is a Hindi version of it with me, but then I would try to translate. I have translated it for you, and I will read it out to you as it is. And talking to Chandragupta Maurya, what he says, your target must be to achieve perfection. Efforts must be made to achieve perfection. However, it should also be kept into mind that no idea can get perfection. Perfection means that nothing new remains in that idea, and this is something very significant about research. This is to negate the very existence of that idea. Hence, perfection means to acquire the intellectual distinctiveness that gives birth to a thought sequence. One thought gives birth to another thought, and thus the sequence continues. To strengthen the intellectual distinctiveness, shodh, that is research, anusandhan, investigation, and अन्वेषण, exploration, be carried out. We must, now the purpose, we must utilize this intellectual distinctiveness for the welfare of the nation and creatures of the universe. Now, in my very basic article which I wrote, as I said, some 15 years ago, I raised this very question. That research for whom? Means even the multitudes of the problem that continue to be the same as it was some 15, 20 years ago, or let us say some 60 years ago. But every year we are producing, let me say, now the quantity is in billions, not in millions also. In the form of project, in the form of doctoral thesis, in the form of other sorts of thesis, but then the multitude of the problem continue to be the same. Whose responsibility, what is the use of the research in that case if the multitude of the problem continue to be the same? Now, when Bharat was writing Bharatanatyam, now the concept that he gave about the concept of rasa, that brought about a revolution in the field of music and melody and gave peace to the mankind. Now that we need to achieve. Right? That our research must aim at, but then we could not do that. And therefore, we need to change the methods. This is what I talked about in my lecture earlier also. A successful research can be conducted only when the means and tools belong to us. And I underline this. The means and tools, they belong to us. To make our researches yield fruits, we need to employ our own concepts, theories, means, methods, tools and models. Our researchers should employ our own means and tools, such as, you can have a number of questions to me after I finish, right? And they are like prakriti, they are the means. And when we talk about prakriti, we do not talk about nature, but essence. Essence. Prakriti means essence here. Paddhati, methodology. Parampara. Parampara, and when we talk about parampara, we do not talk about tradition. Parampara in the sense of sanskara. Right? Parampara, ankalan. When we talk about ankalan, we talk about assessment. Assessment of a thought or idea. Right? That is ankalan. Then we talk about measured value. Measured value. These were the, let me say, the established means of research in the ancient India. Navonamesh, creative innovation. Navonamesh, the guru, the shishya would stay in the gurukula, and there under the noble patronage of the guru, he would undertake so many experiments and would carry out, would go ahead with the creative innovation that would ultimately benefit the society and the nation. Right? That is gone now. Creative innovation. Tikas, scholarly commentary, not bhashyas. Bhashyas are critical commentaries. Then yukti, logical reasoning. Logical reasoning, which we do not know the meaning of yukti, but we know what logical reasoning is. Right? So that we need to comprehend. Then sambada. When we talk about sambad, we talk about constructive dialogue. Let me tell you, dear friends, in this country, we cherish a tradition of dialogic tradition. Or discoursal parampara in this country was the parameter, the foundation on which the whole discourse was built. The guru would sit here and the disciples under the feet of the guru, and the guru would say, and then let me tell you, it was not like receiving everything from the guru. Even the shishya did have every right to question the authority of the guru. And therefore there have been discoursal, let me say, disputes in this country between guru and shishya. Disputes have there also been in the West also between Socrates and Aristotle. Right here also between Chandragupta Maurya and Chanakya, and the other also whom I don't remember. But then that was given a space. What would arise out of it? What I am trying to tell you is that even the disciple was given the relevant and the respectable place in the whole discourse. And how it was out of that combination of the discourse that the whole idea would emerge. And that would constitute the real phenomenon of the research. That has disappear. Now the responsibilities lies on your shoulder to take it up and carry it forward, right? So that the real research may germinate. Now even our objects have to change. And when I talk about the object, I talk about the material. The themes of our researches should directly and indirectly promote our national, international interest by creating a consensus on an issue. And therefore, when we talk about that, we say consensus. Now, this consensus will lead to an intent. Intent means intention. Consensus. We formed a consensus that this is a problem. Now, then we intend to eradicate this problem. Right? Intention or intent. Now, after that, how to eradicate? We try to creatively innovate. So, innovation. And finally, creation. These are the four, let me say, steps. Number one, let us talk about consensus, then the intent or the intention, then the innovation, and finally the creation, right? That would give shape to a concrete work. Concrete work, concrete research will emerge only when we will follow these parameters. Nowhere does West talk about it. But then when you carry out the research, what do you do? Don't you do this? Right? We have now what we need to do is we have internalized, but we need to give exposure to these research methods that we are implementing in our research so that the world may know the glory of the culture of this country. Now, in Hindi we call it कि गलत गलत परोसा गया. गलत गलत परोसा गया all the time means a conspiracy was being hatched against us. Under that conspiracy, the canopy of the conspiracy, everything was being done. It was being said that this country was divided into caste, and caste had been a tradition of this country for centuries together. And we have been following it. Mulkraj Anand wrote untouchable, no problem. He wrote it. Right? And that is the problem of this country now. But then we must have interpreted the text untouchable in the sense that it was not the problem at that time that you are pointing out. It has become the problem because of the conspiracy that the British hatched against us, and we need to eradicate it. And therefore caste, because if you look at our Shastra, nowhere will you find the mention of the word caste, because in place of caste only Varnas have been mentioned. And they say that the Varna will be determined not on the basis of birth, but Varna will be determined on the basis of the attributes and the karmas. That we forgot. Even we decided to translate the way we wanted to. We adopted their phraseology, and therefore karma become action for us, or karma become deeds for us. Are karma deeds or action? I ask you as a translator. As a matter of fact, karma does not have any equivalent, and therefore when we translate, we need to give annotation. Alright, at the end of the translation, this is what I mean by karma. Right, this could not happen in this country because we continue to borrow the robes which did not fit our body. Not only this, let me talk about the very word grammar. Do you think grammar and Vyakaran are the same? Is grammar and Vyakaran the same? Because very often when we talk about the translation, we say grammar is Vyakaran. But if you look at grammar is simply the mechanics of a language. I have to make use of NP, VP, NP. I have to make use of subject and then this and then this. Or maybe that I will be talking about the semantic properties of the language. That element will go with element, or the male will go with female, or male will go with male, and so on. When I say I made a bicycle, now the phraseology that we make use of, what the phraseology will say, no, it cannot be used. Can I marry a bicycle? Right? Grammar will say no, marry. Mechanical exercise, but grammar will say marry is a word that can be used only with a human being. And then one human being must be male and the other one female. But when we talk about Panini Dasthadhyay, you go and study. He talks about the philosophy of it. Even the sutras that he gives, he says this is possible. And the possibility, he says, lies in the form of a complement which is not there in English grammar. You need to find out the, let me say, the inferences, and then you reach the conclusion. Because when I say I merit the bicycle, I mean that this bicycle keeps me company, like my wife keeps company with me. Right? So in that sense, the word merit has been used, but then English grammar is silent about it. So dear friend, when we talk about Vyakarana, we talk about philosophy of an utterance. The philosophy of let me say, along with mechanics, it also carries the philosophy of the utterance. Why should we speak? Why should it be spoken like that? Now, the mechanics or the grammar is silent about it. But then we continue to teach our students, and they are let me say, they are misled by the misnomer that grammar and Vyakarana are the same. Don't we need to expose this hypocrisy? Conspiracy. Because this is a conspiracy, because they want to have a dominant hand. That we are superior and therefore we are supreme, and you people are inferior because you borrowed your grammar from us. Right? And then our concept was much broader, let me tell you. It was a major concept than the concept that they gave to us almost, let us say, some 200 years afterwards. Right? After, let me say, Panini, he belonged to, let me say, even years, let me say, thousands of years later, not hundreds. So this you need to, and therefore we need to carry out the research whether the caste system was a part of this country or it was deliberately imposed on this country. Nowadays, when the two countries are at lockerheads, Pakistan, you must be hearing about the breakout and all that. This was the question that came to my mind. Does India have a strategic culture to support its emerging geopolitical ambitions? We need to carry out researches on this. We do not have. What is strategic culture? A belief system for safeguarding ourselves. We could not develop even that belief system. Whose responsibility is it? Not the science. That is why I said the researchers in the field of humanity and social sciences could not keep pace with the researchers in science. They need to keep a pace, and this is how the pace can be conjoined. The pace can be conjoined. Right? We need to develop a belief system, and that belief system must be about how to safeguard ourselves. There is no belief system. I do have my idea, you do have, but then there is no commonality in the idea that binds us together. Now, there is another thing. We have not talked about even the sacred geography of this country. The other day, I was going and we were talking about the Rameshwaram, and this is the idea that came to me from the way we were talking about the things. Now, if you do have a look at the Vishnu Puran, it has got the concept of Bharat. If you talk about Rig Veda, it identifies the boundaries of Bharat. Not this Bharat, but they talk about Vrat Bharat. Right? Vrat Bharat, a comprehensive India, right? A comprehensive, larger India. Right? And when they talk about, let me say, the sacred geography, they talk about several other things also. And therefore can't we define Sanatan Dharma as an interface between Vedic, regional, folk and tribal cultures? Because there has been a strategy to separate the tribals from the Vedic people in this country. Now that is our responsibility, that we, when a nation stands united, I tell you, it continues to be united, and when there are separative tendencies, when they are working inherently, ultimately it breaks down. And therefore we need to give recognition to the sacred geography that this country has had, and that unified the whole nation together. This sacred geography consists of Dwarika, Rameshwaram, Badrinath, Puri, 12 Jyotirlingas, spread throughout the country. Kumbh Mela, which is held at 4 places that you know, Ujjain, Haridwar, Nashik, Allahabad, and then Harikatha, which binds us together. Right? And then myth. When we talk about myth, we say this is something fallacious, not true. But do you think that myth is something fallacious and this is something untrue? But then we need to consider the fact that myth is a cultural device in this country. Right? Myth is a cultural device in this country. For example, something happened. Maybe that the name of that person may be Ram or something else. But then the things happened. There are evidence of this. This is what this country talks about. We need to recognize this. Shouldn't we find out what our sacred art in architecture stipulates? We need to find out cosmic symbolism in Hindu temples. horizontal symbolism and vertical symbolism in the form of architectural structures in our temples. Now that we have not done. The other day I was talking to him, and the same thing I told him. He said, sir, what to do? I said, why don't we integrate architecture with our studies, English studies? Then I said, now you have seen this because we were by the side of the bay, this Bay of Bengal seashore, and there was a temple, and that wrote that everything happened in Tamil. I said, this is how you can contribute. You can talk about the contribution of a language in the building of a nation. Because when the architecture came, when you go to Mahabalipuram, what is the idea that strikes you? That Pallavas were a great dynasty. Cholas were the people who built this country, but they could not find an appropriate space in the history of this country. How is it that only Mughals and the British, they dominated the history of this country? We need to eradicate that myth, right? And that is possible only when we carry out the research with an open eye, not only with the parameters that they gave to us. And therefore we need to make a let me say, discover something about Gopuram. Gopuram, you know Gopuram? Gopuram in the entrance tower. We need to say something about Jagati, is a temple platform. We need to talk about Mandapam, pillared hall. We need to talk about Antarala. Antarala, small entrance hall or where the devotees can sit. Right? Then Garbhagriha, sanctum, and then the Shikhar, pointed structure, or right, on the roof of the temple, right? We need to talk about that. And if you are aware of the Konark temples, what is happening in the Konark temple? There are 12 wheels in the Konark temple in Odisha, which are equal to 12 months. And if you look at the temple, you will find that there is a deep connection between time and astronomy and the solar worship. They say that the rays of the sun will fall on the statue at a particular moment of time. And they explain it, and it is so beautiful. Even the science in this country, let me say, not in this country but elsewhere in the world also, has not yet developed so far that they can talk about all these things. But these things happen in this country, and therefore this is what happened in this country, dear friends. Now what is happening now? And this is very interesting. Now therefore, when we talk about communication, there are 4 parameters of communication. ELT keep special: context, space, time, and usage. These are the 4 parameters which decide a piece of communication, maybe a tense or maybe a sentence. Text is also a tool of communication, but this is something you need to. Text is not something sacrosanct that is found in the library. That is why I talked about not only the printed page. Sacrosanct that is found in the library, the sequence of now, this is something that you need to pay attention to. Text, T-E-C-H-T-S. T-E-C-H-T-S. What are these? Technological text. Technology text that you make use of in the Facebook, or let us say the social media. And the other text. Technological text, let me tell you, almost 80% of the informal conversation is being conveyed through the text, T-E-C-H-T-S, and not through the text. Now, can't and shouldn't we talk about this text in our classrooms? That is the need of this hour. Texts are changing the whole process of writing. Spelling and grammar have undergone a change because of text. Our classroom language does not correspond with text. There is a wide difference between the SMS and internet languages and that of classroom language. Now the question is, which is the real life language? 80% of the text used in real life is text. T-E-C-H-T. Internet language is the language that the world uses now. Therefore, it cannot be ignored. And therefore, we researchers have to think about it. Now, we have threaded texts. Threaded in the technology. Technology is changing the patterns of writing also. There has occurred a paradigm shift. Shift from textual technology to digital technology. And you people need to talk about that in your researches. It has involved all the 4 language skills. We are moving from LSRW to PDAs. What is this PDA? Personal Digital Assistants. Texting to iPhone. Earlier it was iPods, but now iPhone. Even the golden rules of writing have undergone transformation. Because now you give command to ChatGPT and he will write everything for you. Is it a boom? Or is it the beginning of destruction? Or somewhere between the two? Because the fact is that we cannot avoid chat GPT also. Chat GPT cannot be avoided. So how to accommodate, right, this in our teaching and research curriculum? That you need to think about. I can talk about this in detail, but because of the paucity of time, maybe changing in writing patterns, both spellings and orthography, changes in visualizing. Now we have shifted from page to screen. Earlier it was page that was emphasized, but now it is the screen that is emphasized. There is a shifting from using to analyzing also, or operationalizing. There is a shift from doing to operating, from understanding what is being done. Research skills need to be honed. Easy access to information gathering has necessitated a shift from information gathering to pre-positioning critically. And then there is a shift from passive reception to questioning attitude. Now, all the changes and many more, they are taking place. If you look at the content part, then even IKS, Indian knowledge system, that has also come into being, and now people are talking about it, and rather they are saying that the departments of English must be the nodal agency to project this IKS to the outside world. So we need to think on those parameters also. What can be the role of the Department of English? Because let me tell you, dear friends, I will be talking about that also. Because great wars have been fought in this country, even on the academic floors. Right? I will be talking about that, and therefore, what we need to do now? We need to engage, evolve, and analyze the texts. We as teachers of English need to explore the areas of code mixing and code switching which form the part of text. We also need to ponder over our generic choice in writing. Texts really motivate the students. Texts have shown that the long imposed shackles on learners' autonomy are loosening. And now this is something very significant which you should listen to very carefully. Dear friends, globalization has very tacitly put a full stop to the tough wars that were being fought in this country in the Department of English on the notion of purity versus impurity. This is pure English, this is impure English. Right, and therefore I will teach only pure English, not impure English. Number one. Number two, authority and mimicry. This is the authentic verse, this is not the authentic verse or a copied one, and therefore I will not take help from it. Authentic, and what was that was written on the sheet of the paper, that was authentic, and therefore all the study of orality was denied, was rejected. Canonical and non-canonical. Canonical, this is canonical, I will teach. Non-canonical, because orality is non-canonical, I will not teach, I will not research on it. Then they also talked about generic, non-generic, they also talked about disciplinarity and interdisciplinarity or non-disciplinarity. Now let me tell you, the wars has ended, and these wars, now therefore this is a time of peace, and as researchers we should make maximum use of this peaceful time. And therefore let us sit down and recognize the phenomenal changes that has taken place in the departments of English, because now the departments of English are becoming the departments of cultural studies, right? And that is the phenomenal change that this country and the academics is acquiring. And we people need to pay attention to that change that is happening in this country. Now very quickly, because this is what he said to me, Michael, he said, sir, we would also like to know, because I couldn't talk about the reimagining. So how to reimagine English studies? What does the word reimagine mean? Now reimagination means redefining. We may not accept the old definition that came to us. Like there is any ELT person here or any person from, how do we define a noun? How do we define a noun? And usually we say noun is the name of a person, place or thing. Is it so? And if it is so, for example, I give you a sentence, I made 4 rounds. What is the word round here? It is not the name of a person, a place or a thing, and yet it is a noun. Don't we need to change the definition here? And therefore reimagining in the context of empirical studies. Right? Not accepting the old definition if they do not suit the empirics. That's redefining. Number 2, repositioning. And repositioning, earlier what we would say, I am the researcher and therefore I am the detached observer. I will not say anything. But now that the position of the researcher has changed. He can no longer be the detached observer but an engaged participant into the activity. Right? So when we talk about reimagining, we talk about repositioning of the researcher. Then reconnecting, and when we talk about reconnecting, because when the British came to this country, they compartmentalized the knowledge system. And therefore we need to reconnect, we need to make the disciplines interdisciplinary. And this is what NEP also says. I do not know whether your institution has implemented NEP or not, but then this is what NEP also says. NEP says reconnecting interdisciplinarity. It talks about the holistic education. The education that develops your body, that develops your mind, and that develops your spirit, right? And the combination of all the three together. And then reimagining means resisting also. And when we talk about resisting, challenging the dominant discourse, the mainstream discourse, and therefore giving space to the studies of the marginalized, giving space to rejecting the Eurocentric discourse all the time that came to us, right? And Eurocentric parameters, paradigms and narratives, right? So that also reimagining means. Then reconstructing. What is reconstructing? Reconstructing, building the new theories or the frameworks and the models which I talked about in the context of our old knowledge system, so that we can carry out the genuine research work. Now there is a need to develop the theory of translanguaging also. How multiple languages can be used at the same time. The other day when I was looking at it, I simply wrote it here. People were making use of Tamil, English and Hindi, and some of them were making use of Telugu also at the same time. And let me tell you, the people from South and especially Tamil people are very fortunate in that sense. Because if you know your origin, Tamil is the oldest language in this country. Right? And the oldest language, as old as Prakrit language in Rajasthan is. And from Tamil, Sanskrit came into being. Right? And from Sanskrit emanated Hindi. And from Hindi, you see, still people say that English is the connecting language of this country. I say this is a super blah 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 blah. Super false it is. Because a language that can be understood only by 2% of the people, that cannot be the connecting language in this country. I would like to give you one example. The other day, your university sent a car and I was coming from the airport. I thought that this gentleman driver must not be understand this Hindi of mine. So I started talking to him in English, and he was looking at my face, could not comprehend me properly. Then I said, Hindi jante ho? And you see, he did have an aversion. He did not want to say janta hu, but usne, despite his will, he said thora thora. And I tell you, this is the very fact. And when I started talking to him in Hindi, he gave me every answer which he could not give. And then I made him feel, you know Hindi, but you were stuck to English. Why don't you say that I know both Tamil and Hindi? Why English? This is the legacy that we quote from those people, the colonial legacy, and we need to get out of it. English can never be a connecting language in this world, I tell you. You go around the whole country, you will never be an isolated being, I tell you, even if you speak only Hindi. I have been to almost every part of this country. Let me tell you, even the most southern part of this country. This is also the most southern part, right? Now you never feel any problem when you know Hindi because people understand. Right? So we need to identify this parameter also. Rehumanizing, reimagining means rehumanizing, means we need to move from old mechanical data analysis to and should make our researchers empathetic, right? If the researchers are not empathetic, means we should carry out the research with a sense of compassion and the shared experiences. Then reframing, and when we talk about reframing, reimagining means reframing, contextualizing and placing, and then reconciling or recognizing, owning up. Reconciling and recognizing means we need to own up English in this country which we could not own up, and that is the need of the hour. The need of the hour is that we need to own up English in this country, and that need to happen, right? So in this context, I know that I am exceeding your time, and maybe that Dr. Michael and head of the department, they may be getting a little bored. So I would simply wind up by talking about some of the methods, right? Reimagining, right? I talked about that. I think that you have got something about reimagining. Then there are certain things, the research methods. I will simply read out the names of the methods, like content analysis. Now there is a specific procedure that is to be followed when you analyze the content. Then discourse analysis. When you talk about discourse analysis, basically about languages, we need to see how language constructs the social discourse, right? What goes into it, and therefore when we talk about discourse analysis, we need to identify the tenor, mode, and domain. Tenor, mode, and domain. When we talk about mode, we talk about whether this is the speech variety or the writing, right? When we talk about the register for which the language has been used, let us say journalism or poetics or lecturing or whatever. And when we talk about the tenor, we talk about the relationship that is there between the speaker and the addressee, right? So these are the things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about discourse analysis. Then ethnographic analysis, it talks about cultural practices, because every text has got a cultural practice inbuilt, I tell you. For example, when I wrote, I was telling him that I wrote a text during the Corona period, and the name of the text was Rise, that was mentioned by the Honorable Prime Minister of India also in his Man Ki Baat, and he talks about. Now there is a culture around the world. Why am I talking? The culture that prevailed in this country during the time of Corona. So you need, when you study some text around the culture in which it was born, what are you doing? You are doing the ethnographic analysis. Then the semiotic analysis. Have you heard the name of Ferdinand de Saussure? He talked about the sign, and all that, right? So I am not going to talk about that in detail. Then he was followed by a Russian philosopher, Bakhtin. Right? So when you talk about semiotic analysis, therefore, what do? You talk about the analysis of the symbols and the signs. Then the dialogic analysis, as already I have talked about it. Aesthetic analysis, it puts focus on beauty and the form. And when we talk about how to analyze this beauty and the form on the basis of the data. And what is the data? Data is the use of the language in the text. Right? And then comparative method is also there. Then indigenous literary analysis also there, right? Literature methods, right? When we come to ELT, then Excel research, case study, survey method, experimental method, observation, hypertext analysis. Now this is something new, hypertext analysis. Now how they affect the reading practices. Hypertext, I am reading this page, now I have to go to, let us say this is page number 3, now I have to go to page number 33. Immediately I will skip and go to page 33, hypertext. Now how this tendency has affected the practice of reading. Use of algorithm to extract and interpret patterns. This is something very scientific, you need to explore, and you can work in collaboration with the Department of Computer Science in this field, algorithm and the language, right? Algorithm and the language. Now my son is a software engineer, so he said, Papa, this is a very coming up area. In fact, I was not aware of it, and then he explained all the things with all curiosity. So if there is anyone who has got a knack into technology, he can carry out the research work on this. Different types of algorithm, for example, text classification, there are different types of algorithm. You do have algorithm for text classification, for sentiment analysis, for clustering, then for word frequency, for speech recognition and all that. Right? So these are the various methods which can be analyzed, and the last two which I have talked about are very significant for ELT people. Now, to end up, I would say that in this country, overhauling in the field of research is needed, keeping in mind the changing parameters that has struck us. Otherwise, if the researches do not remain relevant, even the teaching will become stale, and when the teaching becomes stale, we will exist nowhere. We will not be able to compete with the world, right? And our dream of becoming the world leader or the guru will become extinct. Thank you so much for this chance, for this opportunity, and for having listened to me very, let me say, very patiently. Now, if there is time, we can take up questions also. I would be very glad to take up questions or the observations that you want to make, right? Or anything that you would like to say. Otherwise, I would, with the permission of the chair, I would take my space. इसका मतलब दो होता है, हिंदी में बताऊं क्या होता है? When you don't have any question either, you couldn't understand anything, or everything went on your head, that you could not comprehend anything, or the second thing is that you understood so much that there is no question that you have right now. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.